Hey Breakfast Club, how you doing? It's DevShell2 here, and I am popping in a video. So how you doing? For those of you who do not know me, again, I am DevShell2. I was the founder of the original Breakfast Club channel here on YouTube. That eventually I ended up shutting down, and Paul got that funk. Enjoyed being a part of so much and liked the concept so much, he resurrected the Breakfast Club, and it is what you see today. I want to thank Paul publicly for not letting the Breakfast Club just kind of disappear and fade into the nothingness of the internet. So thank you, Paul. I wanted to make a video responding to, not necessarily a direct response to Nathan's video, but I wanted to make a video responding to the idea of multiculturalism and melting pot being two different things. I think that concept is a little simplistic. I think it's a little, I guess, misguided. And there's a few reasons why. And first off, let me just say that in my view, they are one and the same. You can't have a melting pot. You can't have a culture or a society that is a melting pot if it isn't multicultural. It just, you cannot have one without the other. Now, there may be, and I'm really talking about America more than anywhere else, the United States of America, because we are known in this country is kind of known as being, the melting pot. There are other cultures or other societies or other nations that are multicultural, and it's much more divided, more delineated, more, but in the U.S., we've done multiculturalism right. And I mean, you can agree, you can disagree. It's a matter of opinion, I suppose. But what our country is today, what our society, what the American culture is today, is much different than it was years ago. It's different than it was 20 years ago, and that was different than what it was 20 years before. And there are many reasons for this. I mean, there's technology and innovation that changes the culture. In the case of the U.S., it's had a drastic impact on our culture. But what changes it in a more gradual way that we may not see straight out, it might not be immediately apparent, is the changes on our society and our American culture from other cultures. And there's evidence of this throughout our history. I mean, when you want to talk about American culture, outside of Native Americans, the only real American culture is the culture that was cultivated and nurtured in the African American communities, slave communities, back in the slave days, where these people, these slaves, were pulled from their culture. They were forcibly removed from their culture, and their culture forcibly removed from them. They had very few options but to develop their own culture. And like I said, outside of the native population, the only real American culture is that culture. And from that, as Joe said in his video, Serious Mind, as he said in his video, that gave rise to all kinds of things that manifest in modern day American society. From the African American slaves, we got the blues and all kinds of music, that this kind of morphed into jazz and heavy metal, and it just grew from that early developing culture from the African American slaves. So there's that. So that's American culture. It's about as American as you get, because it is unique to this country. It was born here. out of necessity. But other than that, most of American culture is brought here from overseas. You talk about, that modern day immigrants, should assimilate. Why? Assimilate to what? Because like I said in the beginning, the culture we have now is not the same as it was 20 years ago, or 20 years before that, or 20 years before that. With every wave of immigrants that comes into this country, the fabric of our society changes. The fundamental nature of what our society is alters slightly, sometimes more drastically, depending on the influences. But there's always a change to the fabric. There's a fundamental change to our society with every wave of immigrants that comes into our country. Yes, there's an impact our culture has on these people when they come in. But they have just as much of an impact on the culture. People talk about assimilating, and it isn't really assimilating as much as it is a collision. And the aftermath of that collision between the culture coming in and the culture that has been developing and changing and was already here. The aftermath of that collision is what we call American culture. And it happens over and over and over again. I mean, again, I've already mentioned music when it came to the culture that was nurtured by the slaves. But beyond that, when you look at, again, music, right? You look at Middle Eastern influences and Indian influences in music in the 1970s. Led Zeppelin comes to mind, songs Kashmir and that kind of thing. There's obvious influences coming from overseas. And these things are absorbed into our culture and become part of it. It changes our culture. Between food. I live in New Jersey. New Jersey is the diner capital of the world. There are more diners in New Jersey than anywhere else in the country. And most of them are 24-hour diners. They are predominantly owned by Greek families. Either Greek, Italian, or Turkish. That's the bulk of the 24-hour diner culture you find here in New Jersey. I grew up, or at least part of my life, in the city of Paterson. Paterson is today the second largest Muslim community, is home to the second largest Muslim community in the country. I lived, alongside them, with them. And I didn't see anybody. There's no one there trying to impose, their way of life or their culture onto American culture. But they are doing what they can to interweave these two things. Their home culture and the culture that they're moving into. And it may take a generation or two, sometimes even 3. And it's not always going to be easy. And there's going to be issues, and there's going to be confrontations, and there's going to be rough spots. But that marriage of these two things will happen. Both the culture and the immigrant culture, both will bend, and they will meld together. It's happened with every other wave of immigrants before, and it'll happen now. It's just the way it is. This is the way it works. And it's because of that. And it's because of these multiple cultures that move into the United States. That it's because of that melding and that bending and that giving and that confrontation is what causes the melting pot. We are a blend of cultures. We are a blended society, a blended country with blended cultures, with holidays and foods, and fashion and music. Everything that impacts our lives is impacted by the different waves of immigrants that come in. And from one of the really few genuine American cultures, which was from the slaves, the African American slaves. So I don't see a whole lot of issue. People talk about these things as if like people are trying to, get into your home and force you to read the Quran, and to accept Sharia law. That's not the way our country works. It doesn't matter. When somebody from the Middle East comes here and they go to the beach and they see the women in bikinis, and they may be outraged by this, and as people who've had families who have been here forever, will say, this is America, don't be out. This is how we do it here. They understand that, and they're still outraged. Now, if they're legal immigrants and they're here legally, then they are citizens, right? Or they're legal immigrants. Well, they have a right at that point to be outraged. They have a right to be outraged by what you see as normal American culture. They have that right. It's part of our culture to allow them that right, to not infringe upon that right. Yeah, they can be upset. They can be outraged. And I mean, they may have, and I don't mean just Muslims, I mean, people from any culture. They may come here with ideas or beliefs or opinions that may actually end up being beneficial to our society. Should we just tell them, no, you have to abandon everything and to assimilate to how we do things just because? Many things in our culture wouldn't be the way it is if we had that attitude from the beginning. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. Between no Irish allowed, the ongoing civil rights issues when it comes to African Americans, the I'm sorry, the stupid furnace, it distracted me. LGBT rights, just all kinds of Muslim bans nowadays. We have these issues. We're not perfect. We're always going to have these issues. There's always going to be stumbling blocks. But I think for those of us who are thinking people, we should at least take the time to consider and to understand and to recognize that this is an ongoing thing. And to go out of our way to perhaps make it a little easier. I started saying before about language, right? People talk about languages, right? Language. Well, the United States doesn't have an official language. I think Miami, I'm pretty sure it's Miami. There are more languages spoken in the city of Miami than anywhere else in the world. That's one of the things that makes, now, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I believe everyone should, in this country, I believe everyone should learn English. Everyone should be able to speak English only because it's the predominant language spoken and makes your life easier. For your own well-being, you should know how to speak English, or at least how to understand. You should be able to communicate. But I think we should take pride in the fact that there are so many languages spoken in this country, and that people shouldn't be degraded or made to feel left out when they choose to speak in their native tongue. It's I think, in a way, it's to our benefit to allow the different people from different cultures to live in an environment in this country where they can feel comfortable celebrating their culture. Look, in every major city in this country, we have a Chinatown, Little Havana, Little Italy. I mean, these are repeated themes in cities across the country. And there's a reason for it. I find it disturbing that this kind of conversation comes up mostly when we're discussing people from the Middle East or people of the Muslim faith. I have no love for Islam. I think it's a great big basket of crazy, and I think everyone would be better off if Islam did not exist. But I'm not going to say that Muslim people are bad people, are inherently bad because of their faith, and therefore they are unable to assimilate into American culture. They have things to add to our culture, not their religion. And as far as I'm concerned, they can keep that. But there are other things about their culture that enrich the fabric of our society. Why wouldn't we welcome that? Why would we degrade it? This is the second time I recorded this video. My opinion, the first time I recorded it was better. It's on my phone. I can't get it off my phone. The import keeps failing, so. Anyway, again, this has been DevShell 2. Those are my thoughts on the topic. This is a little bit longer and rambly than I wanted, and longer and more rambly than the original, but it is what it is. Here it is. It's like 12:30 at night when I'm recording this, and I did my best. Hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Thank you for having me on The Breakfast Club, and take it easy, guys.